What up, students? This is Franklin D. Roosevelt bringing you the New Deal, but Mr. Joseph's about to drop that big deal lecture for you. You better record some good notes, ask questions, and be ready for this test. For real.
After 1935, Franklin Roosevelt was faced with criticism on both the left and the right. Conservatives felt the New Deal had gone too far, increasing the size of the federal government. Liberals had felt that the New Deal hadn't gone far enough in helping so many Americans who were still suffering. And in 1935, the Great Depression is still going on, and Franklin Roosevelt, in his State of the Union address, basically announces what historians now call the Second New Deal. And in the Second New Deal, there's a whole bunch of reforms that are added. And he introduces new laws with the aid of Congress to address people who had been left out of the first New Deal. And these new reforms not only increase the size of the federal government, increase the size of the deficit, but Franklin Roosevelt and the Democrats feel this is necessary. And these are some of those reforms. And if you take a look, they're in some ways a continuation of what was already begun in the first 100 days. You have more public works programs with the WPA, which I'll talk about. You have workers, organized labor unions getting support with the Wagner Act. Welfare benefits to the old and those who are disadvantaged with Social Security. More bank regulations with the Banking Act. Heavier taxes on the rich, the Revenue Act, and help for struggling farmers. So this big kind of reform, the Second New Deal, is considered to be more liberal, more progressive, more active role of the federal government. One of the big concerns was there were still a lot of people unemployed after the first couple of years. Unemployment did go down. The New Deal was successful at getting that 25% unemployment rate down. But the problem with that is you still had people who were struggling. You still had people who needed help. And you could see that in this image in the 1930s, people lining up for free food, for some sort of help. What ends up happening is you get the WPA, Works Progress Administration. WPA was headed by Harry Hopkins, and what it's going to do is it's going to spend an estimated $10–11 billion to provide help to millions of people. One estimate is about 2 million people a year got help under the WPA. Anywhere between 8 to 10 million people eventually worked as a part of the WPA. They built roads, public buildings, bridges, schools, all sorts of different things, airports. There was a huge number of jobs, and basically it was doing public works projects. Very similar to what the PWA had done in the first 100 days. Over here you see a picture kind of celebrating the WPA. You got workers, working on the road. It also hired writers, artists, young people, individuals who were involved in the arts. So you have a painter here drawing what's going on, putting murals in post offices and schools. One of the big projects of the WPA was going around and interviewing the survivors of slavery and recording their stories. So the National Youth Administration gave school opportunities, educational opportunities, jobs, counseling, recreational activities for young people. So the WPA is a part of this Second New Deal, and it was intended to kind of ease the problem of unemployment. Like I said, this cost money, about $11 billion in federal spending to do these projects. So here you got some sewage work being done by people who were a part of the WPA. So this is a big part, road work for these workers. In fact, your book says 60 651,000 miles of roads and streets are put up and constructed by the WPA. And these programs were designed to provide relief to those who were unemployed by giving them public works projects. The bridge over in New York City, today it's called the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge. That bridge was actually a WPA project. So a lot of WPA buildings, even in Los Angeles, there are schools that were built by the WPA during this time. Like I said, roads, basic stuff. Many of these people had no skills, unskilled, but provided the work that needed to get done. Part of it was the Federal Writers Project, where people would be hired to do that type of stuff. Now, the other part of this was not everyone was happy with the first 100 days. I don't know exactly why I put these two in, but they're from the South, they're country, and a big group of people who were unhappy with the first 100 days were many of those refugees from the Dust Bowl. These individuals, one historian said 500,000 people had to leave their home, leave their farm during this time. In the image of the Okies and the Grapes of Wrath, you got kids just hitting the road, families, mothers, men kind of wandering around with no place to go. And what happened is the first 100 days, the Agricultural Adjustment Act was very controversial because it actually produced less crops. So you're producing less crops while there are people who are hungry, and you're taking land out of production, which means if I'm a farmer working on a land, I'm going to potentially lose my job because there's less need for farmers. So this ends up happening, and part of this second New Deal was this resettlement administration.
Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play.
And the Resettlement Administration basically is giving loans to sharecroppers, tenant farmers, and small farmers who were really hurt by the first part of the New Deal, the AAA. They were already struggling because of the Dust Bowl and things like that. Here you got this hopeless farmer, dust storm taking place. And the Resettlement Administration gives them some sort of relief. A big part of it was giving loans to farmers so they could start over. If not getting a loan, you could possibly go live in one of these farmer camps where people would basically band together, and some people feel like, oh, this is too big government, socialism, stuff like that. But this idea of helping those who are landless farmers, they work the land but they don't own the land, where do they go? The Resettlement Administration offers them some opportunities here. The Resettlement Administration is eventually going to be replaced by the Farm Security Administration, and they're going to do many of those same things. Estimated $1 billion in loans to tenant farmers, and people who normally could not own land suddenly now get land under this program. Another aspect of helping those in the rural areas was the Rural Electrification Administration. Not everyone benefited from the TVA. It didn't impact all rural areas. And so the Rural Electrification Administration basically electrified areas that were in the dark and who had no electricity at all. So providing power and light for those in need. A big part, probably one of the most significant parts of the Second New Deal, was its impact on workers in labor unions. If you remember from previous chapters, if you were a worker, your situation was very, very rough. I guess every superhero needs music. No one man should have all that power. You know, if you went on strike, scabs oftentimes replaced you. Companies had Pinkerton guards that would break up your efforts to form a union or to organize. Blacklisting if you were kind of known as being one of those organizers, court injunctions where you could not, continue to form your union, open shop, yellow dog contracts, fears, this idea that you must be a radical, a communist, a socialist, an anarchist. All of this should be reviewed. So it was very tough for workers. If you recall, there were some big strikes: Pullman, Homestead, Haymarket, the Great Railroad Strike, and many others in these pink areas. And if you were a worker, even all the way up until the 1930s, life was difficult. Wages hadn't gone up substantially. They had gone up some. Remember, there was a growing unequal distribution of wealth. And so what the New Deal does, and this is really not Franklin Roosevelt, this is the work largely of a guy by the name of Robert Wagner of New York, Senator Robert Wagner. And he puts pressure on Roosevelt to act on behalf of organized labor. And the Wagner Act is passed, officially known as the National Labor Relations Act. And what it does is it says workers...
Working on it. Working on it. Working on it.
The federal government is working on it. And basically, we, the government, are going to protect the rights of workers to form unions. The government, the federal government, the national government is saying to unions, you have a right to organize. We are protecting your right. And not only are we putting that into law, but we're creating an organization.
Working on it. Working on it. Working on it.
That would allow, if there is some sort of concern or abuse, to investigate potential wrongdoing on the actions of employers. And what you see is the National Labor Relations Act leads to a dramatic increase, a huge increase. Millions of new workers join labor unions such as the American Federation of Labor and others. And so this is a big shift because the government of the United States, with the Wagner Act, is saying to labor, we are on your side in terms of your right to organize. In fact, you can go to the National Labor Relations Board. They still exist, and you can see right here the power to safeguard employees' rights to organize and determine whether to have unions as their bargaining representative. So this is a huge step for organized labor and unions in this country to get the protection of the federal government to organize. Now, another piece of the Second New Deal, and by far the most significant, the one that impacts so many people today, is the Social Security Administration. And what was happening is there were a lot of vulnerable people in American society, and there was no safety net. There was no system in place. If you were elderly and you were in your old age and you couldn't work anymore, how would you survive? If you were a mother with children and the father abandoned the family or passed away or was injured on the job, who would provide for those individuals? If you were a worker and you were disabled at work or lost your job, how could you survive? And one of the biggest reforms of the Second New Deal was the Social Security Act of 1935. Hands down, the most significant program to this day from the New Deal. You know, there's still FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Social Security is the biggie. And what it basically does is money is taken out of checks, both employee and employer pay each month into this federal program. And the idea is, if you need help,
I need somebody help, not just anybody help. You know I need someone help.
if you were someone who over the age of 65 years or older, you would get a pension. Meaning when you are retired, you can collect your benefits, your Social Security payments, which would help you in your old age. If you're a mother with dependent children, and for some reason you're unable to care for your children, you can get some benefits. If you are handicapped or injured on a job, the Social Security Administration would help you out. If you suddenly find yourself without employment, if you are unemployed, you would get potentially unemployment insurance. And so this Social Security Act of 1935, here is Roosevelt signing it. You got Frances Perkins, the first woman in the cabinet. She's over there. She's a big part of this piece of legislation. She pressured Roosevelt to move forward on that. It creates an important concept, this idea that it is the federal responsibility for social welfare in the nation, that there should be a safety net. And if people fall, the elderly, the unemployed, the disabled, the children, the mothers with dependent children, they would be able to get benefits from it. In fact, you got these posters that kind of emphasize the different groups of people who are under this new program. The widow of a qualified worker will receive monthly benefits at age 65. So, widows, elderly people. This has got to be the cutest old man on earth. Here you have an example of old age insurance for those individuals who need help. Speaking of not cute old people, I have an app that basically shows what I'm going to look like old. Take a look. That is fugly, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy your youth while you have it. So these programs, the Social Security Act, is establishing this very important concept of the social well-being of the nation. Join the march to old age security. So different kind of advertisements kind of explaining people this program and how it would work and how it would apply to those different groups. And you could see it does not help all groups initially. In fact, if you were in agriculture, if you were a domestic servant, or domestic maid or housekeeper or babysitter, you could not get benefits at this time. So it's not perfect. In fact, this program, Social Security, is a major concern because it costs a lot of money and there's not enough people paying into the system at this time to pay for it, is the argument. So Social Security is being discussed and debated amongst Democrats, Republicans, and Independents right now because it's one of those programs that a lot of people support, but there is cost in supporting it. So, big idea, second New Deal goes further, more liberal in terms of protecting new groups of people, labor unions, the elderly, children, women with dependent children, unemployed, disabled. It is a radical expansion of the first New Deal, in the sense not radical in overthrowing government or anything, but a huge increase in the scope of the federal government. And it will be debated and scrutinized to this day, but overwhelmingly, Roosevelt had the support of the American people. In fact, in 1936, he is going to win re-election by a huge margin and go into his second term. Very popular amongst most Americans. Hey, what's up, students? I hope you enjoyed the lecture on the second New Deal. I'm just chilling here with Barack Obama, and I want to make sure that if you have any questions, make sure you shoot me an email, ask in class, make a comment on the YouTube video, but make sure you understand the important concepts for this lecture, Franklin Roosevelt's Second New Deal.